Hi, I'm Dr. Frank Granito, Chief Scientist with the Institute for Digital Transformation. I want to welcome you to Digital Dialogue, where different industry experts discuss digital transformation topics and issues that are of concern to all businesses. Whether you are already a digital enterprise, or on your journey, or still trying to figure out what that all means, we know you'll find something here for you. Remember, as a LinkedIn Live session, this is your opportunity to interact with these experts. Post your comments and questions in chat for a full interactive experience. Welcome to Digital Dialogue.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Digital Dialogue. Today's conversation is around the challenges and the opportunities that are available to startups using in digital transformation. And it's interesting, we define startups as both startup companies, entrepreneurially driven organizations and early stage companies, but also startups in new product development and startups in new divisions and companies. Today, I have invited three guests to share their perspective in this dialogue. The first one is Amanda Patanow. Amanda is the managing partner for 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶 Limited and has a few years of experience in launching digital products and connecting both in multiple different markets, both healthcare and consumer devices, and has advised a number of startup companies besides starting her own companies a number of times. The second one is Joe Hodges. Joe is the launched and built a couple of startup companies himself. He brought digital innovation to multiple spaces and advises companies. But as a founder, he brought in a digital startup in the healthcare space, which has its own unique challenges with digital transformations to begin with. And Ned Pope is a senior advisor to 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝘄𝘆𝘀 Labs and works with not only startup companies, but also new groups and new product development and in the digital space for very large organizations. So our purpose today, our objective today, after I ask my speakers to spend a couple of minutes and talking a little more about their background and how they view digital transformation, is to share some insights about the challenges and how to approach them. So Amanda, let me start with you. Can you give us a couple of minutes, your background, and then talk about your perspective on digital transformations in the startup space?
Sure. So a little bit of background. I literally grew up in family-owned businesses, and it's sort of the thing that I've always done. And when I was in second grade, I learned that other kids my age weren't doing sales tax returns with their families. Who knew? And so when we had the money segments in math class and they asked us to count up to 25 cents, I was very confused about what was going on in these poor kids' lives. And so through that experience, I have been able to view business through an operations lens, through a sales and marketing lens, through product development, and direct service as well. And the magic sauce for me is really the point at which I'm able to bring those things together. I call it business strategy. I call it marketing. It's a whole lot of things. Sometimes it's I say that I make things up for a living. And I think that, the role in marketing and positioning is really being the translator of bringing together product teams and operations teams and identifying from that where the true value is and translating it to the audience of potential customers in a way that hopefully drives sales. That's what we're all here to do. And when we think about positioning, we talk about digital transformation, what is it that we mean that's so ambiguous? So we really need a translator there. And I think the first big hurdle and step that I see, whether it is launching a new product or a new company, is people tend to overestimate what they can get done in the short term and underestimate what they can accomplish in the long term. And being able to set that long-term vision for digital transformation and keep your team internally on that goal and that path, but then positioning externally in a way that your audience is going to understand and believe and connect with. Can a device or product or service change our lives? Yep. I can get anything delivered from this little phone that's not even connected to the wall, but that transformation takes time. So I think it's really setting your sights and keeping that mission, that vision, that story internally very strong, and setting a really clear path along the way with your customers and audience.
Thank you. And I'm sure Ned will have a perspective coming from the advising and driving product development side of the house. So Ned, you want to go next?
Sure. So I got my start in government, and then over several years of running government programs and various public projects, transitioned into enterprise level sort of corporate technology, went to the private sector, learned about all the hustle there, and delivered some pretty big projects, specializing in transforming people's ideas into tangible products and solutions within the marketplace. Now, what I quickly learned in that process is that there are a lot of correlations between delivering technology in the government space and what startups face in the private sector, which is you're trying to solve big problems for a lot of people on a small amount of money and a very tiny budget. So you have to get very creative, and you have to pay specific attention to the prioritization. You can't spend your limited resources, time, and energy on things that aren't going to get you the largest, most impactful results. So that was one of the biggest takeaways that I have found in my career or have experienced. And I continue to see it in enterprise development and in large Fortune 500 companies when they have their internal teams that are operating on a fixed budget and trying to deliver big solutions into the marketplace that have a large impact. So even though these companies are situated in different ways and in different industries, a lot of these same principles apply, and you have to get very creative as to how you apply those principles to accomplish the overall goal. So,
thanks, Ned.
Yep.
Joe, you've been in the middle of trying to digitally transform healthcare now for quite a while. So, what's your perspective?
There's a lot of work to do is the primary perspective. But Joe Hodges, I'm the CEO of a company called 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝘁 now, but I started my journey in the nursing home industry as an admissions coordinator. And so coming from the patient care side and taking a look from the perspective of what the consumer or the patient is really looking for and what they need, and solving the challenges of navigation through the healthcare system is a massive undertaking. It's something that we try to do digitally. We do poorly, but we have an audience that has a great level of desire to be connected with that. So when I'm looking at the perspective of what I'm trying to accomplish or what our industry is trying to accomplish, I always look at what is the consumer's digital behavioral expectation. And the digital behavioral expectation that consumers or patients have today is the same experience they want to have, whether they're purchasing retail, whether they're purchasing, another type of service, but it's all literally coming through their phones, and they want to be able to have that experience. A lot of the studies that we looked at and the things that I've engaged myself with became so fascinating. I owned a nurse case management, disease management company. So I worked on the insurance side for a while as I grew in my profession. And I had a company that, performed those tasks. We processed claims. But one of the things we noticed is our members, when they were reaching out to begin or initiate care, had such a massive level of digital fragmentation that there were so many choices for them to look at, so many places for them to go, that it just became confusing. And even though their employers or their health plans provided these things to them, trying to remember which one they needed to use when you have 10 to 14 different options to pick from was massively confusing. And we've got to look at digital optimization from that perspective. And, the focus that I try to bring into light was so fascinating to me that I ended up going back and getting my doctorate in studying mobile healthcare platform design in rural healthcare populations. And the primary focus was solving the assimilation gap between what's available and what we make available digitally to the consumers, and then closing what we call that assimilation gap between making it available and identifying if it's useful. And it's a constant cyclical measurement. You can't build something and expect that it's going to work perfectly. You have to constantly dive back into the cycle and review and look and change and shift and meet the expectations and needs of your consumers.
That's everybody's got a very different background, but we've all been around this. So I'm going to propose something and maybe get your individual reaction. So I think one of the things that happens is that people confuse the digitally enabled business and startup with a digitally transformed startup. So for example, there's a difference between allowing access to your services via digital channels in a creative way through an app, making all those things digitally accessible from I am going to use some digital technology to transform what happens behind the scenes. So if you were going to think through what would be the delineation point? Unless you agree with me, or disagree either way, what would be the delineation point where you say, you know what, no, that's not digital transformation startup. That's just a digitally enabled startup, whether it's a business, a product, or a service. You're all shaking your head, so who wants to go first? Come on, guys. All right, Ned, go.
Okay, so first thing I thought of when you said that was that a digitally enabled startup is obviously a company that's enabled to deliver their service or their product through some form of digital means. When I think of transformation, I think of scalability. All right. So you can piece together a lot of different components to deliver a product or service digitally. But a transformation to me is when a company only has to make a single configuration change when their user base increases. So I like to challenge a lot of early stage companies to say, hey, if you went from 5 users to 500, what changes would need to be made within your system in order to accommodate that increase in participation and usage? Does it require 5 different things to be upgraded? Because if so, you are not digitally transformed. You are digitally enabled, but you're not transformed. And so to me, transformation is thinking about not the current state of your product, but it's really, what the future state or the ultimate goal that you want to get to and making sure that you're prepared for that. To me, that's transformation and kind of what I've seen.
Amanda?
Yeah, I think that I agree with a lot of what you said there, Ned. And I think that there's also the question of what do we mean when we say digitally transformed? Like who is it that we are claiming to transform? Is it, like Ned was describing, our own business model, or are we hoping to transform the technological experience of our users and customers? Are we saying that we're going to transform the market or their lives in some way, shape, or form? And I think that, like everything, there's clarity is crucial, but also proof, right? So what is it that you mean? And I think of the example right now, every company in health IT right now and a lot of other industries are touting AI. They're an AI company. And in many cases, they wrote their own static algorithm based on some information, or they have ChatGPT open on their desktop. And so I think that as a consumer, I know I'm very skeptical when I hear a company tell me that they're going to transform anything. So I think that, again, it goes back to explaining and showing and being really transparent in what the actual value is that you're delivering, So do the transformation. Don't tell me that you're going to.
Sorry, so here's one of those funny stories, because I guess my angle is always, venture investors, early stage startup capital. How do we do that? So and as a background, I built my first true AI model as an expert system in 1990. So I've been screwing around with AI for a long time. Built a AI platform, a real AI platform that included everything from NLP to machine learning, sentiment detection, expert systems, and sold it to a large security company. So we had a presentation from a group of students a couple of weeks ago at the University of Tampa, where I sit on their, not a judgment, it's a consulting panel where we help these kids figure out how to flesh out their ideas. I swear to God, this kid used AI, machine learning, NLP probably 15 times. So I said, okay. And now, of course, he doesn't know my background. So I said, what's your definition of AI? And I swear to God, he must have memorized the Wikipedia definition of AI, because he recited it nearly verbatim. And then I said, so what do you understand about AI? What's your background? And he was classic. He said, I have a degree in English and I'm working on a marketing program. I was like, okay. So AI is another one of those digitally transforming the world, but what does it really mean? So Joe, what's your take on that?
Oh, it's funny is looking at all of these new buzzwords and new things that we all have that everyone claims to use. A lot of times they're still rules engines and not real utilization of AI tools. But I always go back and I look, particularly as we're talking about digitally transforming, is we always have what we call an intended digital path when we're looking at consumers' experience. And I'm speaking more specifically from the healthcare perspective. So there's this intended digital path, whether it's fulfilling gaps in care, meeting a clinical pathway and guiding the patient down that thing, but down that path. But then we have the actual digital path that the member takes. They don't always meet. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Someone may start down a particular digital path because they have a particular comorbidity or illness, but they may also have another comorbidity. So maybe they have cardiometabolic syndrome. So, they've got a cardiac condition, they have diabetes, and they start down this path solving one thing, but they've got to figure out, well, I've got to get this one met too. So they start shifting direction. And the systems that we build a lot of times are more specifically related to those linear pathways. And we have to analyze and build better responsive tools to stay on path with the member if we're creating a digital solution for them along those lines. So that's where the value of AI and machine learning and tapping into neural nets and all of these things can really be helpful, so that we can better understand where that member is going, or simply using old-fashioned engagement tools to say this person has taken a direction that did not complete a particular pathway. How do we just get someone involved to help them out at that point? I look at the studies that we have, like the McKinsey studies that were out in 2020 for consumer healthcare insights, and in there, 42% of respondents, said that there weren't any healthcare websites or applications that really did a good job. But 81% of them said they wanted their healthcare metrics, but only 11% actually used them. In another component of that study is 74%, they wanted to see their healthcare provider cost, but only 19% were using them when they were available to them. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It doesn't mean that they didn't have the desire. A lot of times it's just that what was presented to them didn't necessarily make sense, or they couldn't find it. And that really comes back to, are you monitoring? Are you looking at what the intended digital pathway is that you created for the member? And then what was the actual digital path that they took? How are you responding to that within their experience? Because again, digital behavioral consumerism says, you have to follow me along my path to get me from A to B, so I purchase. In healthcare, you have to follow me along from solving my healthcare challenge that I may not have described very well to getting me to the right place of service. And so
that's an interesting.
Yeah. So just solving for those things. And it's a huge challenge. You know, we talk about it like it's retail, but there's a ton of complexity in the background.
Ned, that sounds a lot like some of the conversation we're having about how do you scale, right? Because in this case, even if you scaled one of the digital pathways, but you haven't connected it to the analog pathways, you kind of not delivering that digitally transformed experience.
That's correct. I mean, you can, especially if you love this stuff, if you're kind of nerdy like us, right? You can get a little obsessive about trying to find the right level of optimization or you know, utilizing all of the potential pathways to optimization as you possibly can, and losing sight of the main goal, right? And so I always try to approach it and I say, how many quote unquote manual tasks are we trying to eliminate in the course of this transformation? And how much time does that save people? How much headache, how much frustration does that save the users, be it internal users, customers, whatever it is? All right, now that we have this list of all the things that we would love to either eliminate or streamline through this transformation, let's prioritize them. Let's figure out, you know, which one is going to be the most impactful and the top down. I think sometimes, Chuck, what I see a lot is I see companies, especially if they're scaling from sort of startup realm to enterprise grade, either through an institutional investment or an anchor client project that now, you know, forces them to kind of scale up, or sometimes as part of the M&A process. I see the individuals inside of these companies starting to get a little bit too attached to the solution itself as opposed to solving the problem, right? So like the original solution may have been great for the problem in the context of which you reviewed it at that early stage with the resources you had available to you at that time. But now as you scale up, the problem has now either evolved or grown or shifted or pivoted in some way. And so you've got to always keep that mindset of like, look, I'm trying to solve this overall problem. I'm not going to attach myself to the solution. And that's how you end up going to, I see it all the time, going into enterprise companies that have legacy products that are 20 years old, that aren't really meeting their needs, that are requiring people to do manual work that became, you know, unnecessary or obsolete a decade ago. But there were certain people within that enterprise that were attached to that solution as opposed to keeping a focus on the solving of the problem. And I think that's where things can get a little sideways. And then the next thing you know, you're 8 or 10 budget cycles in and your tool has been far surpassed in the marketplace. And I think that's another challenge, Chuck, and the rest of the group. I'd be interested in your thoughts on it. Is technology's moving faster now than it ever has before. Mm-hmm. So you not only cannot afford to get bogged down on legacy solutions and an attachment to those, you can't get bogged down in buzz terms. I remember I was at the Synapse Summit, not the most recent one, but the prior year. Okay, so this is maybe a year and a half ago or so, and everybody was talking about Web3. It's like all anybody can talk about, Web3 conversion. Well, a lot of the companies that were getting really excited about Web3, their solution didn't even have any applicability to Web3, right? They hadn't even really solved their problems for Web 2.0 of like using React to do basic read and write and things of that nature, browser-based products and stuff like that. So I think I hear a little bit of that in the AI conversation, to the point where companies, specifically sales and marketing teams, are starting to act as though they have to mention it as a prerequisite to get into the door or to get a certain level of credibility. And it once again dilutes the conversation and shifts the focus away from the solving of a problem, which is really the whole reason that we're here.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda, that's the whole notion of positioning and messaging, and I'm sure you have a take on that one.
Yeah, I think there's a magic tension point between asking your customers what they want and need, and understanding what problem is actually trying to be solved. And I always think about the Henry Ford quote of, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. And I think that goes back to the, as patients, we want access to our information, but we're only willing to do so much to get to it or understand where it is. But some product team at some point decided that this is what they needed to develop, and they just doubled down on it. And then once the story has been written, if you don't have an environment of that constant iteration of analysis and understanding what kind of results are we getting, are our users behaving in the way that we expected they would, is the product that we've created still solving the problem, or has the problem shifted, and what does that really look like, and how can we explain it to them, how can we give them the story, how can we position the benefit of this, that if they were to use it, they could actually achieve the things that they're looking for. And so again, I think it comes back to that translating between product side and customer side, so that you can find that magic place in the middle there, and be willing to adjust when one side or the other has to.
Well, it's interesting. So here's I was a speaker at the USF Development Dev Fest event last weekend, and listening to some of these relatively young, and some of them are teenagers, right, late teens, early 20s, talking about what they were planning to develop and how they were going to change the world and all the things we're doing. And I used my favorite, probably politically incorrect analogy that all three of you heard me use before, which was, hey, show me the trained monkeys jumping through the flaming hoop. And of course, I got blank stares, and I had to explain to them that, look, if your circus attraction is monkeys jumping through a flaming hoop, don't show me that you can build a tent, because anybody can build a circus tent. Don't spend your time developing a UI UX. Anybody can develop a UI UX. Don't get so excited about the fact that you delivered a new commerce solution, because that ain't the main attraction. If you can't show me that you can actually get the monkeys to train themselves, jump through a flaming hoop, you don't have an attraction. You don't have what you're trying to sell. And I see that a lot with startup companies. And Ned and I sit on a couple, actually, Joe does too, and a couple different reviews of early stage companies where they come in and they have this great idea. And the one that I used was one that had an idea about a new encryption algorithm. And they spent probably the first 30 minutes of their presentation talking about all the cool UI stuff they were doing. And of course, I said, well, which monkeys are jumping through the flaming hoop? And they was like, what? It's like, well, you told us that your attraction is your algorithm. How much digital work have you done on the algorithm? And I got the, well, we think we're going to have to go hire somebody to do that, which basically just kind of made me cringe and mumble something. I mean, how do you see that in your space? What are the things that you hear about that are really cosmetics and things without the actual proof, without the monkeys in the flaming hoops? What are the things that you see in healthcare, in enterprise development, in other places?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. It's interesting. There are a lot of information, I call it informational platforms, that are out there. And having informational platforms has kind of been the response to the market. Is we're going to put it out there, we're going to make it available, we're going to make it in front of them. But when we started studying, the process, and I began actually doing my doctoral research on this, a consumer had to go 10 to 14 button clicks into a platform to actually get to the result of what they were looking for. And, when we come up with the ideas going from informational, we need to consider what is informational versus what is outcome driven, what is immediately responsive, what gets the 1 to 2 button click solution. that the consumer is after. And, you know, we've all got ideas. And when we approach our idea initially, we have to, again, take that broader look. Are we contributing to the digital fragmentation of more options for people to use? Or are we taking multiple options and synergizing that effect to get to the outcome that actually does improve the experience for our intended audiences? And it's not a simple challenge. And it comes down to more than just the idea. It comes down to, what are you coding in? What's your platform? Is this a native app? Is it a progressive web application? Is it a responsive website? You know, is it strictly web-based? When we begin looking at what we're trying to solve for, there's a lot of things that have to be processed, that have to be reviewed, and then have to be tested. I always find I had two professors, Matt Malarkey and Al Hebner, who really created the action design research process model. And following through some particular algorithms, following through some particular patterns of study of anything you're building, and truly measuring the metric of what happened in this one particular area, truly measuring the next metric, and taking it all the way back through that design review cycle and making improvements along the way. It's a never-ending process. It's a never-ending cycle. And it reminded me also of a book that I read called Platform Revolution. And I don't know if any of you all have read it, but this book was really, really amazing when it came down to, you want to build a digital solution? Here are the things that you really have to consider in the process. And to me, it had such a great correlation, you know, to the academic study of action design research, and it put things into the perspective that they need to be. You don't get to build it and they will come. You have to build it. You have to observe it, and you have to change it according to their needs and make it responsive to their needs.
Well, because that's an interesting point. Maybe Amanda, you can talk a little bit about that, because it's the whole notion of, like, you know, I did all this research and I realized that the key to providing the access is to make the information quickly and easily available in language that a consumer can understand. And yet I built an application that's got a cool UI, but it requires 13 steps, and it presents the information in format that it's unintelligible to the consumer. Well, guess what? Your monkeys ain't jumping through the hoop, right? So how do I mean, and I know you've seen that because I've heard you talk about that. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the number of startup founders that I've talked to who have told me that they are going to change the world in one way or another, when they start describing their actual product, they have gotten so far into their own story and their own plans that they've forgotten what the world is outside. And being able to reconnect occasionally. And sometimes they're trying to solve a problem that their customers don't care about or don't know is a problem. And if you have to start by educating your audience that they have this need, you've already lost. You know, and I think that there, especially in the digital space, there will always be early adopters, right? And we love those folks. And we understand that there is a curve for adoption, and we can accept that. But we also have to be very realistic about that notion of, well, it's just because people don't understand it yet. If they don't understand it, that's not their failing. It is our failing, right? And, you know, being able to bring together all of the necessary teams to be able to, understand what the actual need is, produce the proper solution, and then present it back to the world in a way that meets that need. That constant cycle, I think, is kind of what we're all touching on in different ways, is crucial. So
Ned, I you know, this is I call it agile development. It's this hybrid Frankenstein's monster approach to development that tries to do agile development but defaults into waterfall mode at sometimes. And it's how do you bring all those things together? I mean, I love having a Monday meetings because I tend to be an engineer, and I focus on, we're going to solve this way, that way. And Amanda usually says, well, Chuck, have you considered, which is a polite way of saying, you really haven't thought about 75 other things. Let me help you think through them, right? But how do you do that with the development teams? I mean, you work with them, and a lot of them, it was actually one of the points that I made last weekend at the USF was there's a difference between good developers and good product developers, and they're not always the same. And there's developers are required on every product development team, but then product development teams require developers. How do you manage that? Every startup deals with that, including internals.
Yep. So a couple things come to mind, Chuck. So it's you want to make sure that the team is unified and aligned around the problem that you're solving, regardless of what piece your specific team is responsible for producing in relation to the overall solution that you're building. So having that high level gives you some coverage to get out of that waterfall mindset of like, this thing can't be developed until this is done, and then this can't be developed until this is done. Like, you're always gonna have dependencies, no doubt. But if you're always thinking about the solution to the problem being the number one goal, and you're always working to that goal, then you'll understand it's not always a linear path, because as you build, you learn. And as you learn, you become better at crafting the solution. And so the biggest challenge that I've seen that you're referencing is that the business people who understand and feel the pain of the problem don't know how to create the solution. So that's why they need the dev team to build it for them. But the dev team has never experienced the problem itself the way that the business representatives have. They are just trying to meet the need. And so one of the things that I've done in the enterprise transformations that I've done is very simple thing, but it's sometimes we get bogged down and borderline dogmatic in our point of view around agile, right? The UX designer is on the development team. Cool. Well, you guys keep operating that way. What I like to do is bring the UX designer into the solutioning sessions with the business, because when we all learned to read, we understood what the word cat or ball or tree was by associating the word with an illustration in the book. And so even though there's some nuance there, all of us know we picture an actual cat in our head when we hear the word cat because of what we learned when we were children. All right. So I like to bring the designers into the early stage of that, because to your point, Chuck, not all developers are product developers, and not all of them can visualize the solution when they're building it, reading blocks of text in the form of user stories. And so one thing that I think really helps to emphasize agile over waterfall is that, like, hey, in 2 weeks, you're going to get a demo of something that shows a small modicum of this wireframe design that we're showing you right now. But we're not going to tell the team to build it until we're all aligned around this stick figure wireframe of what you're seeing, that things are in the right place, and that when you navigate to certain areas or click on certain things, that certain types of data comes up, and that data is formatted in a way that it's useful to you and that you understand what you're seeing and that it's aesthetically pleasing, whatever, right? So I found a little bit of a way around that by moving the visual design up into the earliest stage, because what you do is you build a trust between your business users and your development teams. There's nothing worse than going into a project that's 3 months in and those two teams are already fighting with each other, because the business is saying the dev teams are creating a bunch of defects, they're bad coders. And then the dev teams turn around saying, we're not creating defects, it works just fine based on the way you wrote that user story and the way we interpreted it. You just changed your mind and you're calling it a defect, right? That relationship between those two is absolutely crucial. And Amanda spoke to the translation piece. That's kind of what a lot of us that are leading transformation projects, that's our responsibility, that translation, to make sure that we have an understanding. 90% of this work is psychological. No matter how much you're using AI, it's still a lot of human beings involved. And we got to make sure that that trust is there, because if the trust is there, you'll never lose sight of the overall goal, which is solving the problem.
And I would add a controversial take on to that. Love everything that you said, Ned. And I am generally the biggest proponent of communication amongst teams. The one exception, and this is the controversial take, in many cases, I find it beneficial to separate sales and product. Because
I'm not disagreeing with you there.
Product has to be focused on all of the problems, all of the things that need to be fixed, all of the things that need to be done and changed. And when your sales force is only hearing all of the problems to be fixed, they start to lose confidence or focus, or they don't have the right story and message that needs to be told. So that's the one that I see a lot of companies, especially in the early stages. We're small, so we have everybody in the room all the time, but it's really hard for a sales force to go out and sell when they're hearing all of the behind the scenes development piece.
I totally get it. And Amanda, to clarify, when I was talking about the business, I'm talking about like the subject matter experts, not the business development team.
No,
keep them far away. Keep them out there in the field, steak dinners and shaking hands, kissing baby, doing all that kind of stuff. Yes. That's where you want them.
Well, Joe, you've been on both sides on that fence. So what's your take on that? You've managed the dev teams. You're the sales guy. You started a couple of companies.
It's hard. Sometimes you're out and you're having those dinners and drinks with your clients, and you're talking with them and you're selling away and you're nodding your head, and you walk out of there, and the next morning you have a mild heart attack as you pull your team together and really see what the roadmap looks like to getting some of those things done. And but I always go back, because anytime those types of things happen, when you're looking at sales and you're looking at initial product development and design, this is what really creates a really solid sales team and a solid development team relationship, is the understanding of what it is that you were solving. And I always go back to healthcare. I hear a constant statistic is we have low utilization. We have the only primary utilization that I want to see initially is the assimilation gap between how many eligible people there are and how many actually enroll in the platform. But there's a truth. You'll never get 100%, and here's why.
Of course.
Only 56% of people on a health plan, on an employer health plan, ever have one medical claim a year or more. Now, think about that for a second, which means that, over 40% of your population is probably not going to download that, because they're just not thinking. They're either younger, they don't have any necessary illnesses or comorbidities that need attention, but there are going to be times when they need it and need it all of a sudden, so that's why I'm never happy or satisfied unless we have 78% enrollment on, the platform, because I know that of those, that 40-something% that doesn't enroll, or that doesn't necessarily need to enroll because they're not going to use it, they're going to have a minor health event or an emergency health event that they're going to need access, and the most simplified access to getting to the care needs that they have. But when we look at that, when you're looking at what is your design process and who is it for, understanding what your actual utilization should be based on what true behavior is within whatever it is you're creating, and then educating your customer who you're selling to that wants everything, because they all sound like good ideas and they've got plenty of them too, is coaching them and guiding them and directing them back to what are the metrics that actually move their returns on investment, that move the satisfaction of their members, and bringing them back into perspective of what that is. That's ultimately the responsibility of a sales team and a design team working in their separate capacities.
So here's an observation that it keeps coming back. I keep coming back to. Every time we start one of these conversations about digital transformations, to quote Yogi Berra, it's deja vu all over again. The themes rarely change from the same themes we were talking about when digital transformation wasn't a thing, right? It's the same issues where, it doesn't change. So Maybe an interesting question to ponder is, what are some things that just are so unique when we try to start up something or launch something that I just absolutely have no application anywhere other than in a digitally transformed solution? And let's not use AI. Anything except, ABA, anything but AI. So, what do you guys think? Absolutely unique.
In hindsight or currently? Because I think that my perspective is, where the true unique transformation occurred happened, like the observation happens after the fact. When we look back on going from DOS to Windows, I remember teaching my boss how to use a mouse. And when I went back to visit years later, she says, "Do you still love those computers?" And I was like, "Do you still love electricity?" The smartphones, they were very cool. I was addicted to my BlackBerry like everyone else. But I don't think that in the midst of it, any of us knew, well, most of us didn't know that this was actually the unique transformation. So I think that so many of these things come through observation after the fact.
That's an interest.
So Chuck, I'll give a final thought on that too. I know we're at time, but I think one of the things that always helps to remind people is that technology is a tool, right? Folks get going on the technology, like we said, obsession with the tech itself, the product itself being the solution. The technology is meant to just be a tool to help you get something else done. The tech itself is not the thing that you're getting done, although it is what you are tasked with creating. So I think that that's where the really unique element comes in, is that whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish is actually a unique solution to a problem that obviously has existed for a long time. Otherwise, someone would have solved for it already. So it's a matter of perspective, I guess.
Well, yeah, that is indeed true. So I think I know there's a producer behind the scenes looking at the clock. I think we're supposed to go 12:45, and we are at time. So Frank, I believe you're in control of the production studio. So I indulge us for 30 more seconds each as a closing statement, and then you can move us all out and close the session. So Amanda, 30 seconds, thoughts on startups and digital transformation.
I don't think I could say it much better than Ned just did, which is remembering that the technology is the tool. It's the thing that we're using. It's not the end in and of itself, and it's just going to keep changing. So we have to keep paying attention and changing to meet the changing needs. So,
Joe?
Yeah. I always like to say, especially when we're talking to startup folks, is make a decision on what it is you want to solve, research it really well, and put your efforts into it, and be sure that you're creating something that has the greatest level of unique aspect and opportunity for whatever industry you're focused on. Get those things taken care of. You're going to always head down a right path, and then get the right people around you that tell you the truth about your solution.
Well, thank you. And it's been mentioned by a few people. In the end, it's the transformation of a business. It's not just the introduction of new technology, because that happened with the introduction of the wheel and the fire and the mechanical loom. It's not about the introduction of technology. It's about changing the business. So thank you all for the time, and I look forward to further conversations as time goes along.
Thank you for joining our digital dialogue. Be sure to join our next digital dialogue on the first and third Tuesdays of every month.